Welcome, friends, to this new session. Uh, Here we are going to talk about war, how we define war, what are the theories of war, what are the causes and types of war, and all the attendant dimensions which one needs to understand if one were to have a proper understanding of the phenomena called as war. In the popular sense, a conflict between political groups involving hostilities of considerable duration and magnitude is called as war. However, in the usage of social sciences, certain qualifications are added. For example, sociologists usually apply the term to such conflicts only if they are initiated and conducted in accordance with the socially recognized forms. They treat war as an institution recognized in custom or in law. Military and strategic writers usually confine the term to hostilities in which the contending groups are sufficiently equal in power to render the outcome uncertain for a time. Armed conflicts of powerful states with isolated and powerless people are usually called pacifications, military expeditions, or even explorations. With the small states, they are called interventions or reprisals, and with internal groups, you call them rebellions or even insurrections. Such incidents, if the resistance is sufficiently strong or protracted, may achieve a magnitude that entitles them to be called as war. So, generally understood, war is a state of usually open and declared armed hostile conflict between states or nations of the world. Professor Oppenheim, in his British Manual of Military Law, defining war, says that it is a contention between two or more states through their armed forces for the purpose of overpowering each other and imposing such conditions of peace as the victor pleases. This is a legalistic, explanation about what Oppenheim, actually understand with the term war. Now, war as a subject of study is perhaps one of the most researched mass human activity in human history. There are countless number of books, articles, journals, reports, and miscellaneous documents on the topic of war by a wide spectrum of authors and journalists. Even war heroes have provided insights based on their experience on the war field, while scholars have analyzed the decisions and actions of political leaders when they decide to go to war to understand their psyche. Among the multitude of publications, the Prussian general Karl von Clausewitz's very famous classic on war stands out as the most prominent piece of literature on war. It was written after the Napoleonic Wars and was first published in the year 1832. Even today, it is widely considered as one of the most important books ever written about war and strategy. However, some modern scholars have challenged the concepts described in this book of Clausewitz, arguing that the views are very controversial, outdated, and they are very narrow in their conceptions. Therefore, they hold little relevance to the kind of complex and multifaceted conflicts we tend to face in the modern world of today. Nevertheless, we need to look at this writing of Clausewitz, that is on war, to understand how he has been able to conceptualize this concept and to understand its nature as to what war basically means. His work was segmented into 8 volumes, which were termed as books, and coincidentally, Book 1 was titled On the Nature of War. Clausewitz defined war as an act of force to compel our enemy to do our will. Means it is a use of force whereby you make your enemy do what you want. And it is merely the continuation of policy by other means. So war is the continuation of your policy by other means. It is an instrument of policy, or say foreign policy, which a state employs in a certain context. And since there is the use of force, therefore it is called as war according to Clausewitz. Secondly, he says that from this we understand that war is functionally a political tool used for the attainment of a political objective. So policy permeates all aspects of war and has a continuous influence over it. Even if thousands of people are engaged in an armed conflict, it would not be considered war if the fighting lacked a political aim. So fighting or the use of force or violence is not the only condition, but there should be a political aim, a political goal, a political target towards which this armed conflict is intended. Now, even if that target is attained or not, that is not important according to the explanation of Clausewitz. The important thing is that that objective, that aim has to be necessarily there. So that needs to be always present, otherwise it would just be called something else. Thirdly, Clausewitz even goes to the extent of suggesting that political leaders, use war merely as a means to win a bargaining chip, to be used in negotiation towards a peaceful solution. Meaning that conquest and holding of a territory by force was not necessarily war's ultimate objective by itself. So therefore, all these things which happen, when a war or the attendant use of force happens by the name of war, all kinds of use of force, use of territory, all these things are all directed at the attainment of the final objective. So that is the purpose for which all these uses of force are done. Then Clausewitz further tries to classify 2 basic categories to understand war, that is the ideal war versus the real war. He conceptualized the ideal war as one which involved the utmost use of force and exertion of power. This hypothetical ideal type of war would have no limits on the use and level of violence and would aim to completely destroy the enemy. Clausewitz clearly emphasized and flagged that this was purely a theoretical concept and proceeded on to clarify what war would be in reality. So in reality, he is talking about the real war when he says that real war is never an isolated act that springs up accidentally. Instead, it is triggered by the culmination of prior tensions between states. So, real war is made up of or constituted of a successive, hierarchy or a successive acts, which happen one after the other of violence. So he says that it is simply not plausible that a state would be able to concentrate all available resources into one single blow. So it is a succession of events, and real war, therefore, is not always fought until one side wins. Instead, military action is limited to only achieving the political leaders' objectives. So it's not that you completely obliterate the enemy or the adversary, only then it will be a war. But in real war, you are basically concerned with the achievement of your political ends, means the political leaders or the establishment's ends. And once they think that they have been able to attain those ends, the hostilities would most probably end. From this statement about real war, we can see elements of clear thought and logic being involved on the part of state leaders, that they have some very logical arguments which lead to these actions which they take on the war field. Most importantly, the point which Clausewitz asserts by comparing the two is war is basically, whereby he's trying to say that war is basically a rational act. He wanted to highlight the influence that human emotion had, on war. What was its effect? And considering the full range of human emotions such as fear, hatred, anxiety, jealousy, or joy, we understand that this element does not employ logic or rational thought and is therefore commonly referred to as the irrational force acting in a situation of conflict. The second element of chance and probability seeks to describe conditions in reality. So a commander on the battlefield may bring the perfect plan into battle, but actions on the ground will invariably be influenced by unforced circumstances and hindrances on the battlefield itself. This element emphasizes the factors that are beyond human control on the battlefield and is therefore seen as the non-rational force. So the next element describes how war is a subordinate act to policy and therefore it is a consequence of reason and rational thought. Although at first glance, this element seems to simply reiterate that war is an instrument of policy, Clausewitz established the deeper understanding that policies were articulated by leaders based on their interpretation of national interest. So this was therefore the antithesis of the first element, focusing on the aspect of human reasoning and logic on war. Scholars have also identified this as the rational force in Clausewitz's explanation. So therefore, in summary, if one were to understand the theory of war as given by Clausewitz, it condenses the nature of war to the following points. 1. War is always a rational act driven by policies of states who decide to go to war. And the next is that all the three elements which we discussed just now, which he calls as the Trinity, will always exist in every armed conflict. So these are the factors, of chance and probability, of the human emotion, and all these factors, are bound to exist whenever any armed conflict takes place. This is broadly the understanding, which we have always had about wars, and different scholars have given their own explanations in terms of understanding the nature of war over time, since the time of Hans von Clausewitz. Now, in the present times, we have got another concept of another term which has been added to the term war, and that is new wars. It was given by Marie Caldor, a British academic who first coined this term in a book, New and Old Wars, where she is trying to differentiate between the old wars, means the kind of wars we have been having all through history, and then she is trying to explain to us the new kinds of wars. And he says that when she describes this, she says that how the end of Cold War, initiated the demise of interstate war. So till now, the kind of war which we knew was wars which one state was fighting with the other state, or a group of states were fighting with each other. But she says that it led to the rise in conflicts resulting from civic strife, means things which were internal to a certain nation state. And she defined the new wars as the wars of the era of globalization. She observed that the state was declining, and as a result of the decline of the state, means the decline of the control of the state, it opened up to the rest of the world, and there was the blurring of lines increasingly between the state and non-state actors, between the public sphere and the private arena, between the economic aspect of state activities and the political aspect of state activities, and even war and peace. So therefore, Calder argues that the logic of new wars is clearly distinct from the wars of the past, that is the old wars, in four main areas. One, the actors involved. Today, the actors involved are not only the state actors, but there are, guerrilla groups, there are other kinds of, subnational groups within countries which are actors in this kind of a war. The intended goals are also different, of course, because most of these actors are within a country located within a country fighting amongst themselves, or one actor fighting the state actor. So the goals are obviously different. And of course, the methods employed are also different, because many a time when these actors, ethnic groups or guerrilla groups, or sometimes you might call them terrorist groups, they are fighting against the might of the state. So there is a lot of disproportionality in terms of their capabilities, and therefore the methods employed are usually very different. Usually it is in the form of hit and run, guerrilla warfare, and other kinds of methods are used because these groups would like to neutralize the disadvantage which they have in relation to the state actors, and therefore they would use all kinds of methods to ensure that they have some kind of a chance of success when they are fighting the state actor. And lastly, the form of financing. Also, because wars are financed basically by the state actors, because states have armies and they finance their armies and they go on to fight wars. But in the new wars, these actors which are located in different countries of the world, they might be getting finances through black money or through some finances coming through different routes from foreign governments. Sometimes different powers in different parts of the world would be financing different groups of this kind in other countries to further their own national interests. So the forms of financing are, of course, not very open. They are very clandestine. They are many times, cutting across different restrictions or barriers which state actors might try to build, and therefore somehow or the other they might be able to get some kind of finance, mostly external, coming from outside the country, from state actors. Sometimes even non-state actors would be financing them, and therefore their form of financing is very, very different from the kind of financing which armies would be getting. So these are the four main areas in which the new wars are distinct and different from the old wars. Calder further elaborates that states are no longer the primary actors in war. As I just now said, there are other actors, and these are the non-state actors like private security contractors, we have mercenaries whose job is to fight, so they would be fighting in one theater today and tomorrow they will be fighting in some other theater of the world. So they are fighting for money. So that is the kind of people today we have who are ready to fight anywhere. For them, there is no cause is important. They take money and then they go fight in different parts of the world. And then there are groups who are known as jihadists, who are rather motivated by this desire of salvation after their death. So they could be people like this, who are motivated by some misplaced religious zeal, who would be fighting in some parts of the world. They could even be Muslims, they could be even Christians, they could even be communists, and they could be having any kind of ideological orientation because of which they are ready to fight. So, and there are paramilitias. These combatants do not fight each other in a decisive manner. And conflicts no longer revolve around attaining a specific military victory. Sometimes these conflicts keep on simmering for decades, So they are long drawn conflicts and they keep on happening in some part of the world. Sometimes they are full blown and sometimes they start simmering at a very low flame, but they keep on, festering in different parts of the world for a long period of time. Kaldor further adds that these non-state actors are, of course, not driven by traditional political goals, and they would use war for their very local, cultural, or sometimes even religious needs. Sometimes, they might even seek to prolong the state of conflict, as I just now mentioned, that it goes on for decades, just to glean some economic benefits. So they might be having different kinds of objectives depending upon where they are placed, how they are located, and what are the objectives which they are trying to attain. And depending upon that, they would be, rather you would find that their configurations and the way they operate and the longevity of their operation, it all depends on what their objectives are. So sometimes the objectives could be very limited, and once those objectives are attained, sometimes these groups dissolve and the state of war comes to an end. But many a times, it is a conflict which goes on for a long time. We in India have had experiences of such kind of conflicts, in the state of Punjab. The conflict is festering in the northeast and the Kashmir region of India for a very long time. And similarly, there are the Naxalites, who are located in different states of India, who are fighting state agencies and the state itself for their own ends. So all these groups have different objectives, they have their different needs, and their method of operationalization of conflict also varies, from actor to actor. So according to Mary Calder, this is the kind of war which is more endemic, which is more prevalent in the present world. So on the one hand, interstate wars are declining, means the number of those wars is going down and we have less and less number of interstate wars with the passage of time. But on the other hand, she argues, and as we see in the world, that the new wars or the number of new wars in different parts of the world is on the rise. So this is a new phenomena, but it is apparently, it looks that it is localized, it is not that dangerous and its consequences are not so grave, but it is like a festering wound, and therefore countries which experience these kinds of wars have a lot of issues as far as the development, as far as the maintenance of peace and order in their countries is concerned, and as far as even to govern their societies. Many countries in Africa are finding it extremely difficult to rather govern or to do the day-to-day activities as far as governance is concerned because of these very serious kind of wars or these new wars which they experience on their territories. So in the next section, we will discuss about the different theories, which we have got as far as understanding why wars take place. So that would be taken up in the next section. Thank you.